So welcome to the Diplomat. Thank you very much for taking out the time and joining us today. Today joined by an amazing young man. He said that I must say that. Ambassador Geoff Doidge. Tell us about, a man that's walked many paths and many journeys in government and still looking so young. What is the secret, Geoff?
Well, I'm well looked after by Carol, and she's done a fine job over the years, so I'm not showing any wear and tear.
Yeah, I see. So, wow, a man that you've worn many hats. Of course, if we go back to your earlier days, which we will get to in minister, ambassador, stuff like that. But take us back to Geoff, the young little boy Geoff. Where were you born?
Stephen, I was born in a town called Kokstad, which is on the N2, so it is on the map.
Oh, yes.
It's a long way from Cape Town. By car, probably about 16, 17 hours drive. And it's 2.5 hours south of Durban, if you're just trying to locate it mentally. A town that was founded by the Griqua leader Adam Kok III. That's why it's called Kokstad. In Dutch, those days it would have been Kokstad, named after the Griqua captain Adam Kok III. And this town was started by the Griqua pioneers that left Griqualand West and settled in what became East Griqualand, which is still the name until today. So became the Griqua community in East Griqualand. And of course, when demarcation happened, it moved from the Cape province and became part of KwaZulu-Natal under the new dispensation and the new constitution. But yes, I was born about, or grew up on a farm, I should rather say, 60 to 70 kilometers from Kokstad, on the foothills of the Drakensberg Mountains, in a part of the country that I call or refer to as God's own country. Yes. It is beautiful. It is in the Natal Midlands, and it's extremely beautiful with the mountains on one side and farming land and farms on the other. Of course, the mountain range, the Drakensberg, forms the border between Lesotho and KwaZulu-Natal and a little bit of the Eastern Cape at that particular point. So they all those provinces on our side, two provinces come together at that particular point, and of course the Kingdom of Lesotho on the other side. So languages spoken there are mainly Sesotho and a little bit of Xhosa, and then of course English and Afrikaans. Oh, wow. So there is a very strong Griqua community that's settled in that particular area. People that are very proud of their heritage and of course their culture, and they've managed to preserve it for many, many years. So it's a part of the country that's not very well known, but I grew up in this amazing community, and literally that formed me and made me who I am. Of course, my own family and the community that I grew up in.
I love that.
That's where I hail from.
I love that. So you obviously went to school there and growing up there. Talk us about some of the challenges growing up as, to use another, for lack of a better word, a colored man growing up in South Africa during that time. It must have been difficult for you, Geoff.
Well, we were fairly insulated as a farming community in a place called Swartberg, where I grew up. But when we moved to Kokstad, of course, I became a little bit more conscious of what was going on around me. When I grew up on a farm, I had two different playmates. I didn't realize then that they were actually different to me. I thought one was better looking than me, and so on. And the other one spoke a different language. So I thought, well, you know, I can learn from him, and I taught him a bit of English and so on. And it only dawned on me when I started going to school that one happened to be an African, and the other happened to be an Afrikaner. And therefore we go to school together, and that broke our little hearts. I mean, we were devastated. How could this happen to us? We grew up together, surely we can go to school together. But that was not going to happen at all. And then at a later stage, we began to experience town life, where all sorts of things were going on. It was illegal to have your domestics staying on your premises, and scary things used to happen at midnight. We were living with my mother, and yes, it was a difficult period. So you grow up in that environment, and then you begin to question. And of course, that led to many other things that followed in my career. So whilst I was very keen on business, I went into business on my own with a partner of mine, a friend. He's late now, Robbie Jones. We went into a spares business, a motor spares business.
Oh, wow.
And it grew phenomenally. Later on, we managed to sell part of the business to a big automotive company in South Africa that bought 51%. And then we started importing a lot of motor spares. It became a very good business. And after 13 years, I decided to leave and focus a little bit more on politics. But the drama we had then, I was 26. My partner was a little bit older than I was at the time. And it was very difficult. We couldn't get a license to trade in the main street of the town because it happened to be zoned white. And so as these stumbling blocks occur in your own life, you then begin to realize that there's something drastically wrong. And for myself, coming from a family, as you can see, my surname, that where that surname comes from, and happen to be colored means that I have mixed parentage somewhere along the line. And then you begin to wonder why people are treated differently, and why my surname would give me some privileges, not all, but less on the other side. And you then begin to ask a lot of questions. We didn't know very much about what was happening elsewhere in the country because we were fairly insulated and inward looking, and nobody really went out and made contact. There wasn't much traveling those days. If you went to Durban, it would take you half the day to travel what is now 2.5 hours. You could possibly do it in 2 hours with freeways and expressways. So you take half a day to go there. So who wanted to go there anyway? And if you went by train, to a day and a half. So why would you want to travel anyway? So we weren't really exposed to what was going on elsewhere. But I became politically aware, and as I moved on in life, I began to realize that there was a job to be done, and I had to make a contribution. I simply couldn't just live as we were living at the time. And of course, that came with its own problems and risks and so on. But yes, finally we made it to 1990. And yes, of course, that was the moment of his history.
So were you very close to Nelson Mandela? Did you work closely with him?
Well, in Parliament, yes. When I served in Parliament as the Deputy Chief Whip of the ANC, I was second Deputy Chief Whip. I think Minister Naledi Pandor happened to be the first Deputy Chief Whip. At that time, the position was unofficial, but she served as Deputy Chief Whip, and I think I followed in her footsteps and became the second Deputy Chief Whip. And that, yes, there's a picture of President Nelson Mandela in Parliament, and my seat is directly behind his. So it's a very famous picture. It probably is my only claim to fame in life. But that was a very privileged seat to be in, because whenever the president wanted to know what was going on in Parliament, the program of Parliament and certain questions, you would be just behind him to assist him in the process. Yes, but even that limited access and working relationship taught me so much. It changed my life completely from what I used to be as an activist. And I can imagine for people that were closer to him, the impact that would have had on him or on them. So yes, Steve, it was a very interesting time of my career, something that I never bargained for in life. And I had also met Nelson Mandela prior to 1994, because I served my my organization in the Transkei, which is former Transkei, one should say today. But of course, this was very close home. Of course, the Eastern Cape is my political home, although my home landed on the other side of the boundary. And my political ANC in the Eastern Cape. So yes, I got to meet a lot of ANC leaders who helped form my political thinking and informed my own ideology and understanding of the ANC. So I was very fortunate to have that guidance and mentorship.
And then moving ahead to obviously serving in cabinet as a minister, was that under Thabo Mbeki or Jacob Zuma?
Well, in Parliament, I had served as, firstly, a member of Parliament. That's the basic starting point. And then I became a whip is sort of like a political manager, admin, and then I moved on to being the deputy chief whip of the ANC. And later on, I became House chairperson responsible for committees and ICT in Parliament. And then also, as House chairperson, you preside in the Assembly, and you have a load of other responsibilities that you carry on behalf of the presiding officers, who are the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker. And in that sense, you then have a lot of managerial responsibilities for the institution, an institution that I grew to love and I miss very much. And then after the appointment as minister under Kgalema Motlanthe as president.
Oh, it was Kgalema, okay.
Yeah, there was an election in 2007. I nearly got my years wrong. 2007, then President Zuma became the president, and I served under him until the first cabinet reshuffle, which happened in 2010 in October. And then I had to resign my seat to take up the posting as High Commissioner to Sri Lanka. That was my first posting.
Wow. So serving in government as a minister, is it challenging being in that role?
Yes, well, it's a huge responsibility, and the portfolios in government are enormous if you think about it. So the responsibilities are equally to the task. So you've really got to be focused, and you're not excused of your commitment or responsibilities to Parliament. That continues. Yeah. And ministers are accountable to Parliament, so that continues. They want you there. They want to know what you're doing and what you're not doing and why you're doing it. Yeah. So it's a tough job. Yes, it is. But it's challenging. You realize then that you have a potential to make a difference. So yes, I think the potential outweighs the negative part of and the responsibilities. It is something that you can grow into, and that you can actually make a huge difference and serve the people.
Okay, and then moving ahead to your role as the ambassador in Thailand for South Africa, tell us about that role, and how long have you been in that role?
I came to Thailand after Sri Lanka in 2016, round about this time of the year. I think it was round about September I started here. Yes, exactly. It's 4 years to almost the day soon. And then I served here as ambassador in Sri Lanka, because it's a Commonwealth country we refer to as High Commissioners. Yes, yes. Of course, that changed when I came here, and it was a new experience altogether, because I've never served in a country where there's a monarch. In the other countries where I served, like Bangladesh, Maldives, you have the head of state is either the president, or the prime minister is the person that's head of government. Yes. But here it was different, because you have a monarch, and everything is done through and with the king. So I had to present my credentials to His Majesty the King. And that was quite an experience in itself. Yes. And then you You deal directly with government ministers and so on. But also in Thailand, as resident ambassador here, I also provide services to Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar because I'm accredited to those countries as well. So literally you have to play a role in 4 countries, given that this posting has 3 other countries that you look after. So yes, it's a lot of work. It's an interesting region to be in. These 4 countries form 40% of ASEAN. And this is a very dynamic region economically, one with a lot of potential for us. And I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface. I think there's a lot more potential for us as the years go on and more work gets done.
And the relationship between South Africa and Thailand, how is that?
The relationship's very good, Steve. We probably at the 26th year now of our bilateral relations. But of course, that is the formal relationship.
Yes.
If you go back in history, the first envoy from Siam, as Thailand was called in, was shipwrecked off the Cape Coast and was then taken in by the governor of the Cape at that time. And 3 or 4 months later, when there was a ship coming back to Thailand, he managed to board that ship and came back to his homeland. So that was the first sort of Thai that obviously we know of that set foot on South African soil. But after that, there were several diplomats appointed in various capacities that had offices in Cape Town. And one of the colleagues in the Thai embassy about 3 years ago actually discovered, did a lot of research, discovered exactly where the office was in Cape Town. So that's something interesting for Cape Town maybe to follow up. So there's a link between Thailand and specifically Cape Town. But then of course, politically, our relationship goes back to when Thailand was part of the Bandung Conference in Indonesia in 1955. When the decision not to recognize their government, but in fact the ANC had been invited to that conference. It was the Asia-Africa conference at which that resolution was taken. So, you know, the relationships at an informal level have been there for a long time, but formally, as we call them in today's diplomatic terms, the bilateral relations are 26 years old. And I think these 2 countries have a lot of potential for each other.
Okay, and your role as an ambassador, and what are you wanting to achieve while you are there in Thailand? And talk about some of the projects that you've been involved in while you're there.
We are guided, Steve, by our government's priorities. And as you would know, this doesn't need much research to find out what those are. We need foreign direct investment in our country. We need to find markets abroad for the products that we produce, because we still tend to export raw materials to these markets that are growing very high percentage in terms of GDP. But we need to export our products that we are manufactured in South Africa, and the value is added in South Africa and then exported. That's where the trick of the trade is. Exporting our raw materials simply ends there. We don't see the beneficiation benefit as South Africa. And that is what we need to focus on. So a lot of our time is spent, we call that economic diplomacy. Which means we look at both exports from South Africa and investments from Thailand into South Africa. And yes, we are making good progress. We're seeing more and more interest in the automotive sector. Because if you look at our exports from Thailand, or let me put it in better, simpler terms, the imports from Thailand are mainly in the automotive sector, which means that we import components to assemble the motor vehicles in South Africa, and many of those get exported. we need capacity to actually manufacture those components in South Africa so that we can add value, create the jobs, build the skills, and then we are exporting a much more value-added product to the markets that these motor vehicles go to. So this is what we are concerning ourselves with at the moment in terms of that sector. On the other side, there are many products that could come into these markets. As competitive as these markets are, there are products that would stand the test of quality, price, and ability. But we need them to do that. These take time because there are processes that need to be followed. Products need to be licensed, they need to be lab tested, and so on. So these are cumbersome and very slow processes. For instance, we've been trying to get permission to export red meat into Thailand. It's gone on for over a decade, and we're still not winning. And we might not win in my time, but we all come here, we make a contribution to the process, and yes, we take it to the next level, and that's what we got to keep on doing. That door will open, that's for sure. It's going to open. But that's just one of the products. But we have, we can export our grapes here, but we can't export our apples and pears. And that's a big market for us. If we get our apples in Thailand, it would be really a huge market for us. So these are the things we grapple with on an ongoing basis.
Okay, and tell us about some of the food that Thailand has. Have you got used to the food that year there? Are you accustomed to it yet? Is it different to South Africa?
Yes, it's very different. Thai cuisine is actually very interesting. In fact, all the countries served in Sri Lanka, of course, tends to be close in the footsteps of India, but not all the way. And then the countries like Bangladesh that I was accredited to is very different. Of course, the Maldives, further down the line in terms of seafood. And then Nepal also was very different, very interesting cuisine. Influenced mainly by Chinese to some extent because of the proximity. But then, of course, you come to Thailand and it's just totally different. So we literally had to adjust to Thailand. Of course, once you get into this cuisine, there's no stopping. And at some point, I had to take this seriously and begin to do something. Otherwise, my suits would have got too small for me. So there is a huge temptation here in Thailand. The food is exceptional, and you can get carried away. Of course, you do miss home food. You know, that you can never get out of your system. Yeah, I certainly do miss papos and sampan beans and some haze-course, but that's the name. Yes, we adapt as we go along. But it's been, this year is my final year in Thailand, and it's been a tremendous journey. I mean, these 4 years have flown past unbelievably, and it's been an interesting journey, one that I've learned so much about Asia, being here, and I'm amazed at the potential that exists in these countries for South Africa. So yes, I really will miss Thailand, and this particular posting that I'm so passionate about. This will definitely always remain one of the most favorite postings of mine for a long time.
On that note, Geoff Doidge, I must call you Malume, eh? Uncle Geoff, huh? I know, I'm only teasing, man. I'm only teasing, my friend. Listen, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us on the show. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Geoff. Ambassador Geoff Doidge in Thailand. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Steve. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And thank you so much. And thank you to your amazing team that keep you young as well.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, my friend. Take care. Another episode of The Diplomat. Thank you very much to Ambassador Geoff Doidge in Thailand. Thank you to Akona, Wade, Puppy, and everyone working behind the scenes that make the show amazing, because if it wasn't for them, I don't know. So make sure that you are interacting with the show at Stephen Taylor SA on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. At Stephen Taylor SA, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Much love. God bless. Take care.